My father stole my college fund and asked me for $15,000 with lies. Years later, my grandfather left me his house, and now I charge $2,000 rent to the man who betrayed me my entire life. I'm 33 years old. I work in financial consulting, and I need to get this story off my chest because, honestly, I still can't believe everything that happened with my father over the last few years. I mean, I always knew he was complicated, but I never imagined the extent to which he was capable of lying and manipulating the entire family for money. I guess I should start from the beginning. When my parents got divorced, because that's where everything really started to go wrong. I was like 10 years old when Karen and Andrew finally decided to separate, and honestly, it was more of a relief than anything else because they had been fighting about everything for years, like everything from who washed the dishes to how to raise the kids. What I remember most from that time is that they used me as a messenger between them. You know? My mom would tell me, "Tell your father he needs to send the child support check." And my dad would tell me, "Tell your mother, I already sent it even though he hadn't done it yet." It was exhausting being the kid in the middle of that situation. I literally felt like a mail carrier, but with the emotional baggage of two adults who couldn't communicate like normal people. I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' Ruth and Raymond's house because there was peace there. My grandmother Ruth would make me cookies, and my grandfather Raymond would let me help him in the garage with his carpentry projects, and nobody asked me to carry messages back and forth. After the divorce, I lived mainly with Karen, because she was the one with a stable job and a decent house, while Andrew basically bounced from apartment to apartment for years. My mom worked in school administration, nothing fancy, but it paid the bills, and she was incredibly practical with money. Like she kept a record of every expense and taught me from a young age to save and not spend on stupid things. My father, on the other hand, always had some project or get-rich-quick scheme that never worked out, and when I went to visit him on weekends, when he remembered to pick me up, because sometimes he just wouldn't show up, there was always some excuse for why he couldn't buy me what I needed or why we couldn't do something he had promised me. Once he promised to take me to a baseball game for my 12th birthday. He even bought me a team cap like 3 weeks before, and the day of the game he just didn't answer the phone. And later he told me he'd had a work emergency that he never specified exactly what it was. Things changed a bit when I was 15 years old, and Andrew met Teresa, who was a really kind woman and had a daughter my age named Julia. Teresa worked as a nurse, and honestly, she was too good for my father. We all thought it, but nobody said it out loud. They got married like a year after meeting, and suddenly, I had a stepmother and a stepsister, and honestly, I got along well with both of them from the start because Teresa made a genuine effort to include me in family things. And Julia was pretty cool. She liked the same video games as me and didn't mind that I showed up on weekends to invade her space. For the first time in years, my father seemed to have his life a bit more organized. They had a decent house because Teresa was good at managing money, and there was like a sense of stability that I had never had with him before. But then came time to go to college. I was 18 years old and had been accepted into a pretty good school to study finance. Ironic, considering what would come later. I know. For years, my father had told me, "Don't worry about college money. I've been saving for that. You're going to be fine." And I believed him like an idiot, because I wanted to believe that at least in that, he would come through. Turns out that when it came time to pay tuition and I asked him for help, he told me he had used that money for the new family, that Teresa had had some medical expenses, which was a lie, I found out later, and that he needed that money for other things. He literally told me, "You're going to have to figure it out on your own. Get student loans or work. I did the same thing at your age." The thing is, he hadn't gone to college. He had worked in construction since he was 18, so his comparison didn't even make sense. But there I was, 2 months before starting classes without any plan for how to pay for them. Karen saved me, basically. She didn't have much money saved, but she got a second job on weekends, and between that, my student loans, and my part-time job at a restaurant, I managed to pay for college. It was 4 brutal years of working and studying nonstop. Like I slept about 5 hours a night and lived on coffee and ramen, but I graduated without owing my father anything, which in retrospect was the best thing that could have happened because I didn't owe him any favors and didn't have to listen to his lectures about financial responsibility coming from the man who had stolen my college fund. When I was like 22 years old, Teresa and Andrew had a daughter, Chloe, and honestly, I was happy for them because they seemed content. Although the age difference was weird. I was 22 and my new baby sister was a baby, but, well, blended families are complicated. I kept minimal contact with my father during those years, like I'd call him on Christmas and on his birthday, and that was it. I built my life away from him, and I was okay with that. I got a good job after graduating, started making decent money, met Yasmin, who was amazing, more about her later, and basically, I was living my best life, without the constant drama that my father brought to everything. Then, when I was 25 years old, I got a call from Andrew that I didn't expect. He told me we needed to talk about something important, and my first instinct was to hang up, because nothing good had ever come from those conversations. But something in his voice sounded desperate, so I agreed to see him. We met at a coffee shop near where he lived still, in my grandfather Raymond's house, important detail for later, and he dropped on me that he needed money for Julia's college, that she was going to start in a few months, and he didn't have enough money saved. I asked him, and what happened to the college fund that Teresa had been saving for Julia since she was a kid? Because I knew Teresa was super organized with money and had mentioned that fund several times when I was a teenager. My father got all uncomfortable and started with a story about how Chloe had had a medical emergency when she was like 3 years old, something with her heart or lungs. I don't remember exactly. And that they had had to use Julia's money to pay the medical bills because insurance didn't cover everything. He told me, "I need you to lend me money to help Julia. It's not fair that she suffers for something that's not her fault, and you're making good money now, right?" I was sitting there thinking, seriously? This man who refused to pay for my college is asking me for money for his stepdaughter's college? But I liked Julia. We had always gotten along well, and the idea that she would lose her opportunity to study because of my father bothered me. I told him I would think about it and talk to Karen, my mom, who basically told me, "It's your money and your decision, but if you're going to help make sure it's directly for Julia and not for Andrew, because he's going to find a way to use that money for something else." So I called my father and told him, "I'm going to help, but with conditions. First, I want you to be honest with Teresa about what happened with Julia's money, because I bet she doesn't know the whole truth. And second, the money goes straight to the university, not a cent passes through your hands." He got furious and told me I had no right to get involved in his marriage, that it was between him and Teresa, but he finally agreed when I told him those were my conditions or nothing. I don't know exactly what he told Teresa, but apparently they had a huge fight, and she called me crying, thanking me for helping Julia and apologizing for Andrew, saying she didn't know he had asked me for money and that she felt horrible about the whole situation. I told her not to worry, that Julia was practically my sister, and I wanted to help her. I ended up lending her like $15,000 over 2 years to cover part of her tuition and books, and Julia graduated and got a good job in marketing, so in the end it was worth it. While all this was happening, I had met Yasmin at work. She was an external consultant who came to help with a project, and basically, we fell in love in a matter of weeks. She was smart, funny, beautiful, and came from an Afghan family that had immigrated when she was a child. Her parents were amazing. They welcomed me with open arms even though I wasn't Muslim or anything, and honestly, her family was more welcoming than my own. We got engaged when I was 29, and she was 27, and when I told my father, he said, "Are you sure about this? She's from Afghanistan, right? That's going to be complicated." He didn't say it directly, but it was obvious he had a problem with her background. And when I introduced Yasmin to him at a family dinner, he was rude and distant with her, making uncomfortable comments about cultural differences and asking her invasive things about her religious beliefs. Yasmin handled everything with a lot of grace, much more than I would have handled in her situation, but after that dinner, she told me she didn't want to see my father again if he couldn't treat her with basic respect. I told her I understood perfectly, and that honestly I didn't want to see him either, so we moved forward with wedding plans without including him much in the process. The thing is that a few months before the wedding, I needed some extra money to cover some expenses because weddings are ridiculously expensive, you know? And I remembered that my father owed me those $15,000 I had lent him, plus another $5,000 I had lent him over the years for various emergencies he always had. I called him and told him, "Look, I need you to pay me back at least part of the money I lent you." It doesn't have to be all at once, but I need something for the wedding. He laughed. He literally laughed on the phone and told me, I didn't ask you to marry that girl. That's your problem. And besides, I never borrowed anything from you. That was a gift from you. I almost had a heart attack right there, I told him. A gift? You literally told me you were going to pay me back. I have the text messages where you promised it. He told me I was remembering things wrong, and that he had never promised anything, and that if I was dumb enough to give him money without a signed contract, that was my problem, not his. I hung up the phone, shaking with rage. Like literally my hands were shaking, and Yasmin had to calm me down because I was about to drive to his house and make a scene. She told me, forget it. It's not worth it. We're going to have the wedding anyway and your father isn't invited, period. But I couldn't leave it like that. The betrayal was too big this time. It wasn't just about the money, but about years and years of lies and manipulation, and I was tired of being the one who always stayed quiet to keep the peace. So I did something I probably should have done years before. I wrote a long message, like a complete essay, detailing all the times my father had lied to me, stolen from me, or manipulated me throughout my life. I included the thing about the college fund he used for his new family, the money he owed me and refused to pay, all the broken promises since my childhood, and his racist behavior toward Yasmin. I sent it to the family chat that included Karen, Teresa, Julia, and my grandparents, Raymond and Ruth, basically everyone except Andrew and Chloe, who was too young to understand those things. I ended the message saying I didn't want a response or explanations. I wanted everyone to know who Andrew really was and why I had decided to cut him completely out of my life. The response was immediate and much bigger than I expected. Julia wrote to me saying she had always suspected something weird had happened with her college fund, but her mom had told her not to ask questions. Teresa called me crying again, saying she didn't know Andrew owed me money and that she thought I had helped out of generosity, not because he had promised to pay me back. But the real bomb came from my grandfather, Raymond. Raymond called me like 2 hours after I sent the message and told me, I need to tell you something important, and I probably should have told you years ago. Turns out the complete story about Chloe's medical emergency was true. She did have health problems when she was little, but Raymond had paid all the medical bills, every cent, because he had good insurance and good savings. Andrew never had to use Julia's money for anything. He had simply spent it on who knows what, and then invented the medical emergency story to justify why the money had disappeared. Raymond said he had kept that secret because Andrew had asked him not to say anything, that he wanted to handle the situation his own way with Teresa. But now Raymond was furious that his son had used that lie to manipulate me and get money out of me. My grandfather said something else that was basically the cherry on top. He told me, you know your father still lives in my house, right? In the house I bought 30 years ago and let him use when he married Teresa. Well, I've decided that house is going to be yours. I'm going to transfer it to you as a wedding gift and as a way to compensate you for everything my son has done to you. Andrew doesn't deserve to live there for free while he treats his family like garbage. I didn't know what to say. I literally went mute on the phone because I didn't expect that at all. I told him he didn't have to do that, but he insisted. Said he had already talked to his lawyer and the papers were in process. When Andrew found out that Raymond was going to give me the house, he completely lost his mind. He sent me like 50 emails in 2 days, some begging, others threatening, saying I had poisoned the family against him, that I was an ungrateful son, that Raymond was senile, and he was going to fight this legally. I blocked him everywhere and told Raymond to handle everything through his lawyers because I didn't want any contact with Andrew. My grandfather told me not to worry, that he would take care of everything, and that Andrew had no legal basis to fight because the house had always been in Raymond's name. I married Yasmin 2 months later in a beautiful ceremony without my father present, obviously, and we went on our honeymoon to Italy for 3 weeks. I blocked all family members during that time because I wanted to enjoy without drama. And when we came back and I checked my messages again, there were like 200 missed messages. Most from Andrew, but also several from Teresa and Julia, saying we needed to talk urgently. I called Teresa first because she had always been straight with me, and what she told me was worse than I imagined. After everything exploded with the message I sent and with the house thing, she started investigating Andrew's finances more thoroughly because nothing he said made sense anymore. She found hidden bank statements showing large cash withdrawals over the last few years. thousands of dollars he couldn't explain. When she confronted him, he first said it was for investments that hadn't worked out, then said it was to help a friend, basically changed the story like 5 times, until finally Teresa found messages on his phone that gave him away. Andrew had had an affair for almost 2 years with a woman he met at work, and he had been using family money, including the money that was supposedly for Chloe, to pay this woman's rent and buy her things. When the affair ended because she left him, for another guy, Andrew had to pay her like a type of blackmail so she wouldn't tell Teresa, and that's why he desperately needed money. That's why he asked me for money using Julia as an excuse. Basically, the whole story was lie after lie after lie, and the money I had lent him hadn't gone to Julia, but to pay off his ex-lover to keep her quiet. Teresa told me all this crying on the phone, and I honestly didn't know what to feel. Like I was so angry I could barely even speak. But I also felt sorry for Teresa and the girls who weren't to blame for any of this. I asked her what she was going to do, and she told me she had already started the divorce papers and was going to move with the girls to a smaller apartment, that she couldn't keep living in that house knowing everything she knew now. I told her that when the house was officially in my name, she could stay there if she wanted, that I wasn't going to live there anyway because my life was in another city. But she said she needed a complete change and to start over. The house papers were finalized like 3 months after the wedding, and my grandfather kept his word. The house was completely in my name with no debt or anything. Andrew was still living there because technically it was his residence, and legally he had the right to stay until I started an eviction process, but my lawyer told me the best option was to charge him rent because that way he would have to leave eventually when he couldn't pay. I decided to charge him $2,000 a month, which was quite less than what the rent was really worth, but enough to hurt him. And I sent him the lease contract with a letter explaining that he had 30 days to sign or would have to vacate. He got hysterical again, sent me messages saying, "How could I do this to my own father, that I was turning against him because of my foreign wife?" Yeah, he literally said that. And that Raymond was going to regret giving me the house. I didn't respond to anything. Just sent him the contract a second time with a note saying that if he didn't sign in 30 days, I was going to proceed with legal eviction. He signed on day 29, probably because he had nowhere else to go and knew Raymond wasn't going to help him after all this mess. Now it's been like 2 years since all that and things are in a new kind of normal, I guess. Andrew pays the rent, almost always late, always with some drama. And I split that money between Karen and Teresa each month because I feel like they both deserve something after everything he did to them. Teresa finalized the divorce like a year ago and is dating someone new who seems to treat her much better. Julia has a good job and is engaged. And Chloe is in high school now and seems to be doing okay considering all the chaos. Karen is happy because she's finally seeing some kind of justice after years of Andrew getting away with everything. Yasmin and I are doing well. We live in our own house in another city, far from all that family, drama, and honestly, I haven't talked to my father in person since before the wedding. All communication is through my lawyer or very short text messages about rent. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, like if I was too harsh or if I should have given him another chance. But then I remember all the times he chose to lie and steal instead of being honest, and all the times he used me like an ATM without any remorse, and that doubt disappears quickly. Last week, Raymond called me to tell me he was proud of how I had handled everything, that he regretted not being harder on Andrew when he was young because maybe things would have been different. But at least now Andrew was facing consequences for his actions. I told him it wasn't his fault, that each person is responsible for their own decisions, and that I was grateful for everything he and Ruth had done for me when I was a kid and now as an adult. We hung up after talking for like an hour about random things, carpentry projects, and Christmas plans, and I felt good, like really good for the first time in years. I don't know if my father and I are going to have any kind of relationship in the future. Honestly, right now I don't care much. I've built my own family with Yasmin, and I keep in touch with the parts of my family that I really care about, and that's enough. Sometimes blood doesn't mean anything if the person is willing to sell you out for a few dollars and then lie about it. You know what I mean? I've learned that it's okay to cut ties with toxic people even if they share your last name, and that sometimes the best revenge isn't doing anything dramatic, but simply living well and letting them see what they lost for being so selfish and dishonest. So that's what I'm doing, living my life, collecting my rent, and letting Andrew live with the consequences of his own decisions while I move forward without him.